My name is Rachel and I'm 34 years old. When I was 9 years old, I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched my mother pack my father's suitcase while he begged her to stay. She didn't threaten to leave. She threatened to never leave, to stay forever, just to make sure he suffered for every mistake he ever made. I remember the exact sound of the zipper closing, sharp and final in the quiet house. I remember the hallway light flickering above us. I remember thinking, love isn't supposed to sound like a punishment. That night shaped something in me I didn't understand until years later. I grew up believing that loving someone meant controlling them. That's what my mother taught me, whether she meant to or not. For 15 years, I tried to be the opposite of her. I tried to love quietly. I tried to give people room to breathe. I built a life around the idea that you hold on to people by being someone worth staying for, not by threatening them into staying. Then I met David. David was 36, a high school science teacher, the kind of man who remembered how you took your coffee after the first time you mentioned it. 3 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday, he sat across from me at a small diner, steam rising from 2 coffee cups between us, and said, "I don't want to be the reason you're scared of love." That was the first time in my life someone said that to me without being asked. We got married. 2 years into our marriage, his mother, Linda, moved in with us after her hip surgery. It was supposed to be temporary, 6 weeks, we all agreed. It became 14 months. Linda never liked me. She said it in small ways at first, commenting on how I loaded the dishwasher, telling David I wasn't raised the way we raise people here. But 40 days before our wedding anniversary, it stopped being small. I came home at 6:30 p.m., the porch light just switching on, and found Linda sitting at our kitchen table with David, going through our bank statements. "She's not a real partner to you," Linda said, not even looking up at me. "A real partner doesn't need her name on everything." David tried to explain that my name was on the house because I'd paid for half of it. Linda cut him off. "I raised you alone. I sacrificed everything. And now some woman walks in and takes what's mine." That was the moment I understood. This was never about David's well-being. This was about Linda's fear of losing her place in his life, of becoming irrelevant now that someone else came first. 2 weeks later, at 8 a.m. on a Sunday, Linda cornered me in the laundry room, the dryer still humming behind her. Her voice was low, almost calm, which somehow made it worse. "If you ever try to leave him, or if he ever tries to leave you," she said, "I promise you this, I will never leave him alone. Not for one single day. I will be in every holiday, every dinner, every hospital visit, every birthday, for the rest of his life. You will never get a version of him without me standing right beside him." She smiled when she said it. Like it was a gift. Like it wasn't a threat wrapped in the language of love. What Linda didn't know was that 4 months earlier, David and I had already met with a family attorney, not because we were planning to divorce, but because we were restructuring our finances after his father's passing. Part of that meant formally transferring ownership of the house fully into both our names, replacing an old agreement that had left ambiguity about whose name carried more legal weight. It also meant something else. David had quietly signed paperwork granting me equal decision-making authority in any future medical or caregiving arrangement involving his parents, specifically because he didn't trust his mother to make fair decisions if something ever happened to him. I hadn't told anyone that. Not even my sister. There was one more complication before things came to a head. David's younger brother, Marcus, called me privately and asked me to just let it go. He said Linda was getting older, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded, that fighting her would only make family gatherings unbearable for years to come. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wondered, quietly, if I was overreacting to an old woman's fear of being alone. But then I remembered the sound of that suitcase zipper when I was 9 years old. I remembered promising myself I would never let someone use fear as a leash again, not on me, and not on anyone I loved. The confrontation happened 3 weeks later, at Sunday dinner, with Marcus, his wife, and David's Aunt Carol all sitting at the table. The smell of roasted chicken filled the room. Linda brought it up again, this time in front of everyone, clearly expecting an audience to back her up. I already told her, Linda announced, setting down her fork. I will never leave him alone. Not ever. Not even if she tries to push me out. The table went quiet. Fork stopped moving. I felt every eye shift toward me, waiting for me to get defensive, to raise my voice, to give Linda the emotional reaction she was fishing for. I didn't raise my voice. I set my glass down slowly and looked at her. You'll never have to, I said. Because I already made sure of that myself. Linda blinked. What is that supposed to mean? I reached into my bag and placed a single folded document on the table, the caregiving authorization David and I had filed months earlier. I didn't slide it toward her dramatically. I just set it down, calm, steady, the paper catching the light from the chandelier above us. 6 months ago, David and I made sure you'd always have a place in his care, no matter what happens between us, I said. It's already legal. It's already done. You didn't need to threaten me for something I already gave you. The room went completely still. Carol's hand froze halfway to her water glass. Marcus's wife looked down at her plate, clearly uncomfortable. Linda's face went pale, not with anger, but with something closer to shame, like she suddenly realized she had spent weeks fighting a war that had already been peacefully resolved before it began. I don't understand, Linda said quietly. You don't have to threaten to stay forever, I said. You already have a place here. You always did. I just wish you'd trusted that instead of trying to scare me into giving it to you. David reached over and took my hand under the table. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Linda sat in silence for a long moment. Then, for the first time in 2 years, she said something that wasn't laced with control. I didn't think anyone would choose to keep me around, she said, almost to herself. I thought I had to make sure of it. I didn't gloat. I didn't bring up the suitcase, or my mother, or every cruel thing Linda had said to me over the past 2 years. Instead, I offered her the one thing she never expected from me, grace. You don't have to fight for a place at this table, I told her. You already have one. All I ask is that you stop treating kindness like a weakness. Linda didn't apologize that night. But she didn't argue either. And 2 weeks later, she started asking me questions instead of making demands, small things, like what I wanted for dinner, or whether I minded if she joined us for a weekend trip. 3 months after that dinner, our house feels different. Quieter. Calmer. Linda still lives with us, but the tension that used to fill every room has softened into something almost like peace. Last Sunday, she sat beside me on the porch, the evening light fading gold behind her, and without any prompting, said, "Thank you for not making me beg to stay. I think about that suitcase zipper less now. I think about the version of love my mother taught me, love as leverage, love as control, and I'm grateful I didn't pass it down." If you've ever sat in a room where someone tried to control you with fear instead of earning your trust with respect, I want you to hear this: you don't have to raise your voice to hold your ground. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay calm, stay prepared, and let your actions speak before your words ever have to. Boundaries aren't about punishing people. They're about refusing to let fear decide who you become. And grace isn't weakness, it's what real strength looks like when it doesn't need an audience to prove itself. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, a parent, a partner, a moment where you had to choose peace over power, I'd love for you to stay with us. Subscribe, because every story here is for someone who needed to hear it today.